Less than 6 hours after she gave birth, her blood still not dry, her hands still trembling, her mother-in-law walked into the hospital room and threw a divorce petition onto the bed. Her husband stood there. Not a word, not a single glance. And in that rainy night, they pushed her out onto the street with her newborn child. But they didn't know one thing. The woman they had just abandoned wasn't an orphan with no one to support her. She was the only remaining lifeline of the DeLuca Corporation, the largest criminal empire on the east coast of the United States. Where are you watching from? Please like and comment below to let me know how far my story has progressed. And don't leave, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fresh flowers that nobody had sent her. Serena DeLuca, or Serena Moretti as the world had known her for the past 4 years, lay against the raised hospital bed with her newborn son pressed against her chest. The baby was 6 hours old. He had dark hair, the soft, damp kind that curled against a mother's skin, and he hadn't made a sound in the last 20 minutes. Just breathed, just existed. His small fist had found her finger sometime around hour 4 and hadn't let go. She hadn't slept. She wasn't going to, not yet. There was something about the weight of him. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, lungs clean, heartbeat steady, that made sleep feel like an insult, like closing her eyes would mean missing something she couldn't afford to miss. The storm outside had started around midnight. March in New York came in ugly, and this one was uglier than most. Rain hit the window in sheets. The city below was blurred amber and gray, the kind of night that swallowed sound. She heard the elevator down the hall, then heels, sharp, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that cleared a path without needing to say a word. Serena already knew. She pulled her son a half-inch closer. Luciana Moretti entered without knocking. She never knocked. In 4 years of marriage, Serena had never once seen the woman knock on a door she considered her own. And Luciana considered everything hers. She was 61 years old and moved like a woman who had spent 40 of those years making certain no room could contain her without her permission. Black dress. Pearl earrings. Hair pulled back so tight it smoothed every line from her face and replaced them with something harder. Calculation wearing the mask of composure. Behind her, 2 of Dante's men stopped at the threshold. They didn't come in. They didn't look at Serena. Luciana crossed the room, looked at the baby with the precise detachment of someone assessing a business complication, and set an envelope on the bed beside Serena's knee. Serena didn't touch it. "What is that?" she said. Not a question. "You can read." Luciana clasped her hands in front of her. "Or I can tell you. Either way, the outcome is the same." Serena looked at the envelope, white, thick, the kind lawyers charge by the page to prepare. Her name was typed on the front, Serena Moretti, and something about seeing that name, the name she'd taken, made the inside of her chest go cold and absolutely still. "Where is Dante?" "My son is occupied. He has a child, 6 hours old. Where is he?" Luciana tilted her head slightly, the way a woman does when she's already won something and is deciding how generous to be about it. "Dante is aware of the situation. He asked me to handle the details." Serena said nothing. The baby shifted against her, made a small sound, settled again. She reached down and picked up the envelope with one hand, the other keeping her son anchored against her. She opened it. She read the first paragraph, then the second. Then she set it back down on the bed because she'd read enough. The language was precise, and the intent was clear, and there was no part of what she was holding that required further examination. Divorce petition, filed this morning, grounds listed. Among them, in the clean, bloodless language of attorneys paid not to flinch, paternity in question. She looked up at Luciana. "You're saying this child isn't his?" "I'm saying," Luciana replied, "that my son deserves certainty before he commits his name, his estate, and his legacy to a child of unknown origin." The words sat in the room like something dropped from a height. Unknown. Serena's jaw tightened. She could feel her pulse at the base of her throat, feel it in her temples, feel it in the hand still pressing her son against her sternum. "I was faithful," she said. Her voice was flat. She didn't plead it. She said it the way you state a measurement, without emotion, because emotion had nothing to do with whether it was true. "Every single day of 4 years, I was faithful. You know that. What I know, Luciana said, is what serves this family. And I don't. Luciana looked at her, just looked. The answer was in the stillness. The door opened. Dante Moretti walked in with the particular heaviness of a man who has rehearsed something and knows the rehearsal wasn't enough. He was 43, built wide across the shoulders, a face that looked like it had been made to project authority and had spent years doing exactly that. Dark eyes, a jaw that set hard when he was thinking about something he didn't want to think about. He was wearing the same charcoal suit he'd had on at 10 o'clock that morning when he'd stood in this same room, held his son, and said the word beautiful under his breath like it surprised him. Now he stood near the door, and he didn't come any closer. Serena watched him. "Dante," she said. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the envelope on the bed. He looked at his mother briefly, some exchange passing between them that had no words. Then he looked at Serena, and what was on his face was the worst thing she'd ever seen on it. Not anger, not cruelty, but a particular kind of absence. The face of a man who has made a decision he's already buried. "The test has to happen," he said. "My mother is right that—" "Your mother is right." Serena said it back to him. Not a question, not sarcasm. Just the words, naked, returned to him so he could hear what they sounded like out loud. He pressed his mouth into a line. "This isn't what I want." "Then stop it." The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. She counted. She counted because she needed something to hold on to, and numbers were honest when everything else wasn't. He didn't stop it. He looked at the window instead, at the rain coming down the glass, and she watched the muscles in his jaw work, and she understood. With a clarity that was almost physical, something dropping into place behind her ribs, that he was not going to choose her, that he had possibly already not chosen her some time ago, and tonight was only the formal announcement. "I need you to sign it," he said. "Get out," she said. "Serena, get out of this room." Her voice didn't rise. It went the other direction, quieter, more precise. "Both of you, right now, get out." Luciana made a small sound, something between a breath and a dismissal, and turned toward the door. Dante hesitated. He looked at his son, one look long enough to register, short enough to be cowardice. And then he followed his mother into the hallway, and the door closed behind him with a soft, final click. Serena sat in the silence for a moment. Then she bent her head down over her son's and pressed her lips to his forehead and breathed him in. That specific smell of a new person, warm and clean and entirely without history. And she held herself very still until the shaking in her hands stopped. It took a while. 3 hours later, a nurse came in to check vitals and found Serena already dressed. The hospital gown was folded on the bed. She was wearing the clothes she'd arrived in, dark slacks, a gray blouse, a coat that someone from the Moretti house had brought as an afterthought. Her son was in the transport carrier, properly buckled, wrapped against the cold. The divorce papers were on the bedside table, unsigned. The nurse said, "Mrs. Moretti, you shouldn't be—" "I'm leaving," Serena said. "I need you to bring me whatever forms require my signature for discharge, and I need them now, not in 20 minutes. The nurse looked at the baby, looked at the window where the rain was still coming down in the dark. "It's past 3 in the morning. There's a storm advisory." "I'm aware of the weather," Serena said. "The forms, please." She was discharged at 3:47 a.m. No one from the Moretti family came to the lobby. No car had been arranged. The 2 men who'd stood outside her room earlier were gone. She stood at the hospital entrance with her newborn son and her phone and a bag she'd packed herself, and she watched the rain come down in the arc of the entrance lights, and she felt the cold move through her coat like it had weight. She made one call. It rang twice. "It's me," she said. On the other end, the voice didn't hesitate, didn't ask a single question. "Where are you?" "Mercy General, North Entrance." 12 minutes, he said. And the line went dead. She stood there in the cold. Her son breathed against her chest. Her body ached in the specific bone-deep way of a woman who gave birth less than 24 hours ago and is now standing upright in a storm. And she breathed through it the way she'd breathed through labor, methodically, without wasting energy on anything she couldn't use. She didn't cry. She'd had 3 hours to understand what the night meant, and she'd used those hours well, and there was nothing left in her now that required tears. What was left was simpler than that, older than that, the kind of thing that doesn't need language. A black Mercedes arrived in 11 minutes. Vincent Vale got out of the passenger side before it fully stopped. He was 55, lean, with silver at both temples, and the kind of face that had learned long ago to give nothing away without deciding to. He'd worked beside her father for 18 years. He'd watched Serena grow up in rooms where most people were never allowed. He crossed the wet pavement without hurrying. Hurrying was for men who weren't sure. And he stopped in front of her and looked at the baby, and then at her face, and he read what was there the way he always read things, completely, immediately, without asking for an explanation. "Car's warm," he said. "Vincent." Her voice was steady. "I need you to make some calls." "I know. Tonight." "I know, Serena." He took the bag from her shoulder without being invited. "Let's get the boy out of the rain first." She got in the car, the door closed. The driver, a man she didn't recognize, young, silent, competent, pulled away from the curb. Vincent settled into the seat beside her and said nothing for the first 2 blocks, which was one of the things about him she'd always valued. He knew the difference between silence that needed filling and silence that needed to be left alone. Her son made a small sound. She adjusted the carrier without looking away from the window. "My father's accounts," she said finally. "Still active," Vincent said. "All of them. Never touched." The board. "Waiting. 3 years and 7 months they've been waiting. I told them to keep waiting." A pause. "I told them you'd know when it was time." She turned to look at him then. The streetlights moved across his face in intervals. "And the Moretti debt structure," she said. "The refinancing they ran through the Cayman holding in January." Vincent's expression shifted. Barely, but she saw it. A small, private satisfaction. "You knew about that." "I've known about that since December." She looked back out the window. "Who holds the paper?" 3 institutions, 2 offshore, 1 domestic. All of them have been, let's say, cultivated over the past 18 months by parties that trace back through enough intermediaries to the DeLuca family trust. The rain came down against the windows. "So we own their debt," she said. "We own their debt," Vincent confirmed. She nodded once. Nothing dramatic, the kind of nod you give when a calculation you ran in your head produces the number you expected. She'd spent 4 years as Serena Moretti, the quiet wife, the gracious hostess, the woman who smiled at mafia dinners and poured the wine and never spoke business at the table because the men at the table hadn't earned the right to hear her speak business. 4 years of being managed and minimized and slowly, consistently made smaller, the way you make something smaller, not with violence, but with 1,000 small denials. You don't need to understand that. I'll handle it. Just be here and look right. 4 years of being the orphan girl Dante had married for her beauty and her silence, neither of which was what she actually was. She was 29 years old, she had a 6-hour-old son in a carrier against her chest, and a bruised body, and no sleep, and the low, steady burn of something that had been patient for a very long time and was no longer required to be. "I want a full accounting on my desk by 7, she said. "Every Moretti asset, liability, and operating account. I want their political connections listed by jurisdiction. I want names of their highest value alliances and the specific things those alliances need from them to stay in place." "You'll have it by 6, Vincent said. "I also want the company attorney on the phone before 8. Not the DeLuca family attorney. The one my father used for structural work. The one in Boston." "Calloway." "Calloway." She shifted her son in the carrier, gentled a crinkle in the blanket. "And Vincent." "Yes. I don't want this done with bodies." He glanced at her. "Bodies are loud," she said. "Bodies create investigations, martyrs, sympathy. I don't want Dante Moretti's enemies to mourn him. I want them to not notice he's gone until it's already done." She kept her voice even, kept it the way you keep a blade, clean edge, no drama. "We're going to take everything from him through paperwork and patience and the fact that we've been 3 steps ahead since before he ever knew to start counting." Vincent was quiet for a moment. Your father, he said, would have done it the other way. My father isn't here, she said, and I'm not my father. The car turned south. The storm showed no sign of relenting. Her son slept against her. His fist had found her finger again, in the dark of the car seat, without him even waking. Some reflex, some reaching toward the only thing that was already his. She let him hold it. She kept her eyes on the city going past the window, all that wet black pavement and amber light, and the buildings that had been her birthright, and then her secret, and were now, officially, her war. The Moretti family had made a mistake, not an unusual one, the kind that gets made when powerful people spend too long being told they're untouchable. They'd looked at a quiet woman and seen nothing worth fearing. 3 days later, the first Moretti shell company froze. By the end of the week, 2 of their political allies in the 3rd District had quietly declined to return calls. By the end of the month, their primary casino supplier had renegotiated its contract with a new parent company. A company whose ownership, when traced through 6 layers of incorporation, ended at a name they didn't yet know to watch for. And in a penthouse office overlooking the Manhattan skyline, Serena DeLuca, for the first time in 4 years using the name she was born with, sat across from attorney Marcus Calloway and reviewed the acquisition structure her father had built and she had quietly completed, and she understood exactly how much of Dante Moretti's world she already owned. All of it, almost. Almost wasn't enough. There's one piece still outstanding, Calloway said, sliding a folder across the table. She opened it. The page showed an event listing. Black tie. Catered. Security detail of 40. 3 weeks from now at the Calabrese Estate in Westchester. An engagement celebration for Don Dante Moretti and Miss Bianca Romano, daughter of Romano Financial Holdings, to be attended by representatives of every major organized family on the Eastern Seaboard. Serena looked at the date, looked at the venue, looked at the guest list that ran 3 pages and included names that hadn't been seen in the same room together since her father was alive. She closed the folder. "Book me a table," she said. Calloway blinked. "Serena, that event will have—" "I know what it will have." She slid the folder back across the table. "Book the table, and call whoever you need to call about the red Valentino, the one from the Milan collection. I want it fitted by the end of next week." She stood, smoothed her jacket, checked her phone. 22 messages from Dante Moretti, unopened. The first had arrived the morning after she left the hospital. The last had come in an hour ago. She put the phone in her pocket. 3 weeks. 3 weeks before every powerful name in the underworld would be gathered in one room, waiting to watch Dante Moretti celebrate his future. She had no intention of letting that future arrive unopposed. In the nursery back at the DeLuca estate, the home she hadn't entered in 4 years, freshly staffed, freshly secured, smelling like paint and cut flowers, and something underneath both that she remembered from childhood. Her son was asleep in a crib that had been her father's and then hers, and had waited in a storage room for the right child. 2 guards outside the door, a nurse inside, 6 cameras on the grounds. Nobody was going to touch him. Nobody was going to touch anything that belonged to her. She walked to the window at the end of the hall and looked out at the city below, and she felt the weight of it. Not the heavy kind, not the kind that bends you, but the other kind. The kind that holds. The kind that's been yours your whole life and has been waiting for you to stop apologizing for it. The Moretti family had thrown her out of a hospital in a storm with a newborn in her arms. They were about to learn the precise cost of that decision, and it would be collected in full, not in blood, not in fire, but in the slow, surgical, permanent erasure of everything Dante Moretti believed he owned. She turned from the window. There was work to do. And, somewhere across the city, in the Moretti family's private study, a phone rang. Dante picked it up. The voice on the other end belonged to his most trusted financial advisor, a man who had worked for the family for 11 years and who now, in a voice that was trying very hard not to shake, said the 4 words that would start the unraveling. "Don Moretti, the accounts are frozen." The call came in at 4:17 in the morning, and by 4:23 Dante Moretti was standing in the middle of his study in bare feet and a dress shirt with the collar open, holding the phone so hard his knuckles had gone white. "All of them," he said. "Every operating account tied to the Cayman holding," said the voice on the other end. Felix Caruso, 60 years old, 11 years as the Moretti family's chief financial architect, and he sounded like a man who had just discovered the building he was standing in had no floor. The freeze was filed through a domestic instrument. It's legitimate, Dante. It's not a hack. It's not a breach. Somebody filed the right paperwork with the right people and… Who? A pause. We don't know yet. Dante set the phone down on the desk without hanging up. He stood there with his hands flat on the mahogany and breathed, in through the nose, out through the teeth, the way his father had taught him to breathe when the world required him to think before he moved. His father. A man who had built the Moretti empire from 3 blocks in South Brooklyn, and a willingness to go further than the other men would go, and who had died in his sleep at 72 believing he'd built something that couldn't be touched. His father had never met Serena DeLuca. He picked the phone back up. Get Rosario and Tan in my office by 6. Not on the phone, in the room. And Felix. Yes. If this traces back to anyone I know, I want to know before they do. He ended the call, set the phone on the desk, stood still for another 3 seconds, which was all he allowed himself, and then he crossed the study and poured 2 fingers of whiskey he didn't drink and stood by the window watching the city the way men watch things they're no longer sure belong to them. Down the hall, his mother was already awake. He could hear her. The precise, unhurried sound of her moving through her rooms, opening drawers, closing them, preparing for a morning she'd apparently already anticipated. He'd noticed that about her his whole life. Luciana Moretti did not get surprised by things she'd set in motion. He didn't go to her room, not yet. He thought about the hospital instead, thought about Serena's face after she'd read the envelope. Not the cry he'd half expected, not the argument, but that particular stillness that settled over her like something being sealed. He'd seen that look once before. The night they'd met at his cousin Marco's dinner, when one of the older men at the table had said something dismissive about the wine she'd chosen, and she'd simply looked at him. No anger, no flush of embarrassment, just a very quiet, very complete evaluation. And the man, without understanding why, had stopped talking. He'd thought then that he was seeing composure. He understood now, standing at the window at 4:30 in the morning with his accounts frozen, that what he'd been seeing was something else entirely. By 6 o'clock, the study held 4 men, and the specific kind of tension that accumulates when powerful people are forced to admit they don't know the size of the problem they're in. Rosario Tan sat to Dante's left, head of Moretti Security Operations, built like a warehouse, the kind of man who solved problems with pressure and speed and had very little practice with problems that didn't have a physical location. Beside him, Felix Caruso had aged visibly since the phone call, the papery skin around his eyes pulled tight. Across the table, Marco Moretti, Dante's cousin, the family's political liaison, had his phone face down in front of him and hadn't touched it once, which meant whatever was on it was bad enough that he'd decided to deliver it in person. Tell me about the holding company, Dante said. Felix opened a folder. The Cayman entity, Coastal Meridian Holdings, was our primary buffer for 11 of our operating accounts. Gaming revenue, 3 of the port contracts, the 2 development projects in Newark. The freeze was filed 6 days ago through a domestic trust instrument that… He stopped, turned a page, that claims senior debt position on the assets tied to those accounts. Senior debt, Dante said. Whoever filed this holds paper on the underlying assets. They're not stealing, they're collecting, legally. Marco said, That's not possible. We refinanced in January. There was no senior creditor. There is now. Felix set the folder down. The refinancing in January was handled through a broker in Nassau. The broker, it turns out, was acting as an intermediary for an acquisition vehicle that, when you trace it, connects to a trust entity registered in Delaware. He paused. The trust beneficial owner is listed under a DBA that didn't exist 8 months ago. What's the name? Dante said. Felix said it. Meridian Lighthouse Capital. Nobody in the room recognized it. Dante could tell by the silence, the specific quality of it, the way none of them moved to write it down because the name meant nothing to trace. Run it, Dante said. Every layer, every registered agent, every filing date. I want to know who built this vehicle, and when they started building it. That could take... I didn't ask how long it takes. Marco cleared his throat. There's something else. Everyone looked at him. He turned his phone over, slid it across the table to Dante. On the screen was a text message from a name Dante recognized, a state senator, a man who had been in the Moretti family's pocket for 6 years, a relationship that had cost significant money to cultivate and had produced, over those 6 years, 11 specific pieces of favorable legislation and 1 investigation that had quietly died. The text said, "Need to discuss restructuring our arrangement. Timing has become complicated. We'll be in touch." "When did this come in?" Dante said. "Last night," Marco said. 11:40. Dante slid the phone back. He didn't say anything. He looked at the table surface and let the pieces sit there, visible, without reaching for them yet. "How many of our other political contacts have gone quiet in the last week?" he said. Marco's jaw tightened. "I've been compiling a list." "How many?" A beat. 7. The number landed in the room without ceremony. 7 contacts. Not a coincidence, not a dry period, not the natural ebb of political relationships. 7 contacts in 1 week going quiet in the same direction was a pattern with an author, and every man in that room knew it, and none of them said it out loud, because saying it would require them to talk about what it meant. Dante said it for them. Someone got to them before they reached out to us. He stood, walked to the window. Outside, Manhattan was coming alive in gray morning light. The streets below filling with the ordinary traffic of ordinary people who had no idea that the architecture of the city's underworld was currently being reconstructed by a woman pushing a stroller in the DeLuca estate across the park. He was almost certain it was her. Almost. The certainty lived somewhere behind his sternum, low and hot, and resistant to examination. But almost wasn't enough to move on, and moving wrong on something this large would cost more than he had left to spend. "I want a DNA test," he said. Not to anyone in particular. "Expedited. I want results in 72 hours, not 2 weeks." Nobody said anything. "The baby," he said. "I want the test done now." Rosario shifted in his seat. "She left the hospital. We don't have... Find a way." "Dante." Rosario's voice was careful. "She's not at any Moretti property. If she went somewhere we don't have access, then find out where she is." The room went quiet again. A different quality of quiet this time. The kind that accumulates when a request can't be honored and nobody wants to be the one to say why. It was Marco who said it. "She's at the DeLuca estate," he said, "on East 74th. The property has been reactivated. Staff hired, security updated. Our contact in the building management company says the estate has been operational for approximately," he checked his phone, "3.5 years. The silence after that was absolute. 3.5 years. Dante counted it backward. 3.5 years ago, Serena had been his wife for 6 months. They'd been living in the Moretti townhouse on the Upper East Side, going to dinners, attending weddings, doing the ordinary machinery of a marriage that hadn't yet settled into what it was going to be. 3.5 years ago, she'd been learning which of his men to trust and which of his mother's friends to avoid, and he had genuinely believed, finding her footing. She'd been maintaining a parallel estate. "Who owns it?" he said. His voice came out quiet, quieter than he intended. "The DeLuca Family Trust," Marco said. "Which means, I know what it means." He turned from the window. "Get out, all of you. Felix, I want that ownership trace on my desk by noon. Marco, reach out to the senator's office directly, through the back channel, not the public number. Rosario." He stopped, looked at the man. "Stand down on finding her." Rosario blinked. "Don," I said, "stand down." He picked up the whiskey he'd poured 3 hours ago and finally drank it. 1 swallow, set the glass back down. "Everyone out." They left. The door closed. Dante stood in the study alone for a long time. Then he went down the hall and knocked on his mother's door. He knocked, which was a thing he almost never did, and the knock itself was its own kind of message. "Come in," Luciana said. She was sitting at her vanity, dressed already, working a pearl earring into her left ear with the unhurried precision of a woman whose morning routine had survived 40 years of crises. She looked at him in the mirror and he could tell immediately that she was reading his face and that she didn't like what she found there. "The accounts are frozen," he said. "I'm aware. 7 of our political contacts went dark in the last week." She said nothing, set the second earring in. "The DeLuca estate on 74th has been operational for 3.5 years, he said. "The entire time Serena was living with us." Luciana turned from the mirror. She was very still. "What do you know about DeLuca?" he said. "Dante, what do you know about who she is?" He took one step into the room. "Not what you told me, not the orphan, not the girl with no family, not the woman you approved because she had no leverage and no network and no reason to be anything other than what you wanted her to be." His voice was steady. He kept it steady the way you hold a line against a current. "What do you actually know?" Luciana folded her hands in her lap. "Her father was Carlo DeLuca," Dante said, because he could see she wasn't going to say it first. Carlo DeLuca, who ran the most significant criminal infrastructure on the eastern seaboard for 22 years, who died without a named heir because the heir was a woman and because he was careful enough to keep her name out of every room where it would have mattered. He watched her face. "You knew." "I suspected," Luciana said. The word hit him like a flat object. "You suspected," he repeated. "When your father was alive, there were rumors about DeLuca having a daughter. We never confirmed it." She met his eyes in the glass, then turned to face him directly. "When you brought Serena home, I had her investigated. The investigation came back clean, too clean, the kind of clean you get when someone has been very deliberately scrubbed." A pause. "I made a judgment call." "You made a judgment call?" He heard his own voice go low in a way that had nothing to do with volume. "You made a judgment call that the woman I was married to might be the heir to the DeLuca syndicate, and you didn't tell me." "I told you what I knew." "You told me she was nobody." "She was manageable," Luciana said, and there was no apology in it, not even the shape of one. "As long as she stayed in this house, in this marriage, attached to this family, whatever she was or wasn't, she was contained." The child changed the calculation. He stared at her. "You threw her out," he said slowly. "With the divorce papers. You threw her out because you knew that a DeLuca heir carrying a Moretti child was a problem you couldn't manage inside this house." "I threw her out," Luciana said, "because a woman with her heritage and her potential access to DeLuca resources represented a threat to the family's long-term. You used me." He said it without heat, which was worse, somehow, than if he'd said it with fury. "You used the paternity question, which you invented, or at minimum engineered, to give me a reason to sign papers I wouldn't otherwise have signed, and you did it within 6 hours of my son being born. And you didn't tell me what you actually knew about who she was." Luciana stood. She was shorter than him by a foot, but she'd never in his life let that matter. "I protected this family." "You destroyed it," he said. "You just don't know it yet." He left her standing in her room. In the hallway outside, he stood with his back against the wall and closed his eyes and felt, for the first time in a very long time, something that was not authority, not calculation, not the managed heaviness of command. Something older and less useful. The particular vertigo of a man who has only just realized he's been standing on ground that belonged to someone else. His son's face, that first hour, 6 hours old, the dark hair damp, and the eyes not yet focused but searching, with that specific newborn intensity, that biological urgency for something to fix on. He'd held him for 11 minutes. He'd counted. He pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled to Serena's name. 22 messages, all sent, none answered. He'd written things in those messages that embarrassed him now. Things that were true, maybe, but that he'd written without the context he now had, without understanding what she already knew about their situation and had known far longer than he had. He started to type a 23rd. Then he stopped. He put the phone back in his pocket. Whatever he had to say to her now, it wasn't going to be said by text. Across the city, in the DeLuca estate's main office, a room that had been her father's and now had her coffee cup on the desk, and her reading glasses on the arm of the chair, and her son's monitor on the corner, where she could see it from every angle. Serena was on her 4th hour of work when Vincent set a folder beside her elbow without comment. She opened it. Rosario Tan made inquiries about the estate this morning, Vincent said, before 8 o'clock. He was pulled back within the hour. Someone told him to stand down. Dante? She said. Most likely. She read the top sheet. Real estate cross-referencing, the kind her team had been running on all Moretti properties for weeks. The compound in Westchester, she said. Still fully secured. Luciana uses it as her primary residence when she's not in the city. Event staff is already contracted for the engagement party. 42 people, confirmed 3 weeks out. She set the folder down, looked at the monitor. Her son was asleep on his back, one arm thrown out to the side, the way babies sleep when they've decided the world is safe enough. She watched the small rise and fall of his chest for a moment. The Romano family, she said. Bianca's father. What's his actual exposure to the Moretti debt structure? Vincent settled into the chair across from her. Romano Financial holds an indirect position in 2 of the properties we now control. They don't know that yet. They think they're invested in a stable Moretti asset. A pause. They'll find out when we want them to find out. Not yet. She picked up her pen, made a note. I want them in the room first. I want Marcus Romano standing next to Dante when he understands what's happened. I want everyone in that room at the same time. The engagement party, Vincent said. Not a question. The engagement party. She looked up. I want a table. I want our full security complement. And I want the announcement prepared. The full disclosure. The asset transfer documentation. Everything that puts the DeLuca name on every piece of the Moretti empire, ready to be delivered in that room in front of every major family on the East Coast. Vincent was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant he was doing the arithmetic. If we do it that way, he said carefully, there's no going back. The Moretti family loses face in front of every peer they have. Dante can't recover from that. No negotiation, no arrangement, no... I know, Serena said. And Luciana. We'll do something desperate, Serena said. Yes, I'm counting on it. She met his eyes. Because desperate people make mistakes, and when Luciana Moretti makes her mistake, I want witnesses. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the way he'd nodded when she was 17 years old and had walked into her father's study and laid out a supply chain analysis that had taken his senior men 3 months to produce and had taken her 9 days. The nod that meant, you've already seen further than I have, and I'm choosing to trust that. I'll book the table, he said. And Vincent. She picked the folder back up. The DNA test Dante ordered this morning. He stilled. Let it happen, she said. Whatever channel he uses, whatever lab he finds, don't block it. Let him get his results. She turned a page. I want him to know the truth before that party. I want him standing in that room already carrying what he did. Vincent stood, straightened his jacket, moved toward the door, then stopped. He called, he said, 3 times this morning, through our secondary exchange. He's trying to reach you. She didn't look up from the folder. I know, she said. He waited. He'll have to wait, she said. He's had 4 years of my attention. He can wait 3 weeks. Vincent left. The door clicked shut. Serena set the folder down and leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling. The high, plaster ceiling of a room she'd sat in as a child, doing homework at that same desk while her father moved through his empire with the focused patience of a man who understood that real power was never hurried. He'd built the DeLuca Syndicate over 3 decades. He'd hidden her identity for 25 years. He'd kept her name out of every dangerous room until she was old enough to walk into them herself. She'd walked in. She thought about the hospital bed, the envelope on the white blanket. The way Dante had stood near the door and not come any closer, the look on his face that she'd spent 5 sleepless hours trying to categorize and had finally understood for what it was. The look of a man choosing what was easy over what was true. Not cruelty. Cowardice, which was harder to hate and left a worse residue. She wasn't doing this for hate. She wanted to be clear about that, clear with herself, in the way that mattered, the internal accounting. This wasn't heat, this was architecture. She was building something, the way her father had built things. Foundation first, visible structure later, and by the time anyone understood what they were looking at, it was already done. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, she would walk into a room full of the most powerful and most dangerous men in the Eastern underworld, and she would put her name on the wall in letters none of them would ever be able to take down. Her phone lit up on the desk. A number she didn't recognize, but the area code was right, and when she answered, the voice was Marcus Calloway's assistant, confirming the final piece of the acquisition documentation had cleared its last legal review. She thanked him. Ended the call. Outside her window, the city moved through its morning, traffic, sirens, far off. The specific percussion of New York on a Thursday in March, relentless and indifferent, and entirely unaware that something was ending in its center. She pulled the next folder toward her and got back to work. And somewhere in the Moretti townhouse across the park, a phone was ringing with the results of a DNA test that a laboratory had expedited at significant cost. And the man holding that phone was about to receive the confirmation that the son he'd walked away from in a hospital at 4 a.m. was, without question, the word on the lab report was longer than that. Clinical language, percentage certainties running to 4 decimal places. A probability figure that left no statistical room for doubt. But the word Dante heard in his head when he finished reading was simply that. 1 syllable. The whole weight of what he'd done compressed into it. He set the report on his desk. He sat with it for a long time. The study was quiet. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, unbothered by the specific collapse happening on the 4th floor of a townhouse on the Upper East Side. A car alarm went off somewhere below and then stopped. Someone in the building's kitchen was running water. Ordinary sounds. The kind that keep happening regardless. He picked up his phone. Called Serena's number. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, the generic automated kind that didn't even have her voice on it, and he sat there after the beep with nothing he was prepared to say and ended the call without speaking. Then he stood. Walked down the hall to his mother's sitting room. Knocked again, twice now in 1 week, a record for a man who'd spent his adult life entering rooms like he owned them, which he did, or had believed he did. Come in. Luciana was at the window this time, standing with a cup of tea going cold in her hand, looking out at the street below with the expression she wore when she was calculating something she hadn't finished calculating. She heard him enter, didn't turn. He set the lab report on the side table next to her. She looked down at it, read it. Her face didn't change, not the jaw, not the eyes, not the particular set of her shoulders that he'd learned to read before he could read words. Nothing moved. Well, she said. That was all. 1 word, delivered in the tone of a woman conceding a minor point in a negotiation that still had rounds left to run. Something in Dante's chest went very, very still. That's what you have, he said. Well, what would you like me to say, Dante? I'd like you to explain to me, he said slowly, how you filed a paternity challenge on a child you had no basis to question. I'd like you to explain what specifically you knew or suspected about Serena's loyalty. Actual evidence, not politics, not strategy, that justified what you put in those papers. She turned from the window. I told you. I made a judgment. Stop saying that. His voice didn't rise. It went the other direction, which in Dante Moretti had always been the more dangerous direction, and Luciana knew it. He saw her register it, the small adjustment in her posture. You made a choice. Call it what it is. You chose to put a paternity accusation in legal documents filed the night my son was born, and you did it without evidence, and you did it because you wanted her gone before she could consolidate whatever you suspected she had. Luciana set the tea down. I did what this family required. You did what you required. He picked the lab report up from the table. She was faithful. She was every single thing she told me. She was. And I stood in that room and I didn't speak, and I let you hand her those papers, and I let her walk out of that hospital in a storm with our son. He folded the report, put it in his jacket pocket. You told me she was manageable. You told me she was nobody. You knew she was Carlo De Luca's daughter, and you told me she was nobody. I told you she was contained, Luciana said. There's a difference. She's not contained. He looked at his mother, really looked at her, the way he hadn't in years, without the comfortable filter of filial deference. She hasn't been contained since the night you handed her those papers. You didn't neutralize her. You activated her. Luciana's chin came up. We'll manage it. With what? The question came out quiet and hard. Our accounts are frozen. 7 political contacts have gone dark. The refinancing we ran in January. She owns the paper, Mother. She owns the underlying assets, our casinos, 2 of the port contracts, the Newark development. She has legal senior claim to all of it. He watched that land on her face, watched the first real crack appear in the composure. Did you know that? A beat too long. I suspected the debt structure had been accessed, she said carefully. Accessed. He repeated the word back to her the way he'd repeated manageable, the way you repeat something when you need the other person to hear how hollow it sounds. 3.5 years, he said. She spent 3.5 years inside this house and inside this marriage maintaining a parallel operation from a fully staffed estate 4 blocks from where we live, and the best word you have is accessed. He turned toward the door. Dante. Her voice sharpened. You're not going to her. I'm going to a DNA test result, he said. I'm going to my son. If you go to that estate, if you make any approach to her right now, you signal weakness. Every family watching this situation will read it as the Moretti Don going to beg his wife. I'm not going to beg. He stopped at the door without turning. I'm going to try to fix what I broke. Those are different things. I know you don't see the difference, but they are different things. He left. Luciana stood alone in her sitting room with the cold tea and the morning light, and the first real uncertainty she'd allowed herself in 40 years of running this family from behind her son's authority. She stood there for a long time. Then she picked up her own phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in 11 months, a number that belonged to a man who operated outside the Moretti family's official structure, outside the ledgers and the meeting rooms and the names anyone would recognize, a man who solved problems that couldn't be solved through paperwork. He picked up on the second ring. I need you to find something, she said, something that belongs to my son. The engagement party was 19 days away. Serena was in the estate's East Wing conference room, Xiaoban. Her father's old war room, long table, 12 chairs, one wall that was entirely glass looking out over a private courtyard. When Vincent came in and closed the door with the specific quietness that meant he had something to say that the hallway shouldn't hear, she looked up from the portfolio she was reviewing. Dante's car was seen on 74th, Vincent said, 20 minutes ago. He drove past the estate twice and kept going. She went back to the portfolio. And he didn't stop, didn't send anyone in, just drove past. He got the DNA results, she said. Not a question. Timing fits. She turned a page. If he comes to the door, he doesn't get in. Not yet. But I don't want him turned away roughly. Have whoever's on the door tell him I'm unavailable. No other message. Vincent nodded. Then, there's something else. His tone on those 3 words was different enough that she set the portfolio down. He came to the table and set a folder in front of her. Inside was a single page, a surveillance report, time-stamped this morning, with a photograph paper-clipped to the upper corner. The photograph showed a man she didn't recognize, mid-40s, standing outside a cafe on the west side. Unremarkable in every way that was meant to make him unremarkable. Who is he? She said. His name is Edward Krall, Vincent said. Czech national, resident in New York for 6 years. He has no public record. He has a very detailed private one. A pause. He's been contracted twice in the last decade for operations involving, the term used in his network is asset recovery, which is a phrase that covers a significant range of actions. Serena looked at the photograph. Someone hired him, she said. The contact chain traces back through 2 cutouts to a number registered to a woman named Elena Cassi. Vincent paused. Elena Cassi is the name Luciana Moretti uses for her personal discretionary accounts. The ones that don't appear on any Moretti family ledger. The conference room was very quiet. Serena looked at the photograph for another 3 seconds. Then she looked up at Vincent. When was he contracted? We believe this morning, within the last 4 hours. And the target? Vincent held her gaze. We don't have confirmed documentation of the brief he was given, but his operational history, his 2 prior known contracts, both involved taking something from a location in order to create leverage. He stopped. Not money, not property. She was already standing before he finished the sentence. The chair rolled back behind her and she was moving toward the door, phone out, dialing the nursery extension, and the sound she made when it rang twice without answer was not a word, just a breath. Sharp, cut short. And then the nurse picked up and Serena said, "Don't open any door until I'm standing in front of it," and didn't wait for acknowledgement before she was already in the hallway. Her son was fine. She reached the nursery in 40 seconds. She counted the seconds the way she'd counted the seconds in the hospital room, needing something steady while everything else wasn't, and pushed the door open, and he was in his crib on his back, one arm out, the way he always slept, and the nurse was standing with wide eyes, and the 2 guards outside had their hands at their sides, and everything was exactly as it should be. She stood in the doorway, breathed, looked at him for a long moment, just looked, the same way she'd looked at him in the hospital, that first hour, the specific desperate inventory of a mother counting her child's features against some internal record of what is supposed to be there, and finding it all present and intact. Then she turned to the guards. Rotate the team. I want 4 on this floor, not 2. I want the east entrance camera checked every 15 minutes. Nobody in this wing without my direct authorization. Not staff, not counsel, not anyone. She paused. And get me Calloway on the phone. Now. She went back to the conference room. Vincent was still there, standing at the window. He didn't say anything when she came in. He waited. She's moving faster than I expected, Serena said. Luciana operates on instinct when she's cornered, Vincent said. She's calculating that the child is the only remaining leverage that matters. She's right. Serena sat. Her hands were flat on the table, very still, the effort of keeping them still visible only if you knew what to look for. Which means we have 19 days, and a woman who's willing to take my son to stop what's coming. We increase security. We move him if necessary. Moving him creates exposure. She shook her head. A moving target is harder to protect than a fortified position. We stay here. We harden the estate. She picked up the photograph of Edouard Krall, looked at it again. And we find him before he moves. We're already on it, Vincent said. I want him found in 48 hours. She set the photograph down. Not hurt. Found. I want to know where he is and who he's talking to and what exactly his brief says. If there's documentation of the contract, I want it. Because if Luciana Moretti has put a mercenary on my son, that's not a family dispute anymore. That's a criminal matter that ends with her in a courtroom. Vincent nodded. Then he said, This changes the timeline. She looked at him. If Krall moves before the party, he won't, she said. But she heard the uncertainty in her own voice, and she knew Vincent heard it too, and they sat with that for a moment. The discomfort of a plan encountering a variable it hadn't fully weighted. The plan had been elegant, controlled, the kind of operation her father would have recognized. Patience as the primary weapon, the engagement party as the chosen theater, the public revelation timed for maximum impact in front of maximum witnesses. 19 days of finishing the legal architecture, confirming the asset transfers, preparing the announcement. 19 days suddenly felt like a different number than it had this morning. We don't change the party, she said. We don't accelerate. We don't pull back. We find Krall, we neutralize the threat to my son, and we proceed. She picked up her pen. But I want every piece of documentation finalized in the next 72 hours. Not 19 days, 72 hours. That's Calloway has the staff for it if he works through the weekend. Tell him the rate doubles if it's done by Monday. She was already writing. And Vincent. Yes. The announcement at the party, I want it amended. I want Luciana's account activity included. The Elena Cassie accounts, the contact chain to Krall, everything we have. If she's going to make a move against my son, I want the evidence ready to be handed to a federal prosecutor the morning after the party. She looked up. She doesn't get to do this and walk away. Vincent was quiet for a moment. You understand what you're describing, he said carefully. If we hand that to federal authorities, it's not just Luciana. That kind of cooperation opens— I know what it opens, she said. I've known since January. I've had Calloway preparing a structured cooperation framework for 3 months. She held his gaze. The DeLuca Syndicate is going legitimate. Fully, legally, permanently. My father built the empire. I'm going to be the one who turns it into something my son can inherit without looking over his shoulder for the rest of his life. The silence that followed lasted a long time. Vincent looked at her the way he'd looked at her in the car, that first night, in the rain. The look of a man recalibrating his understanding of how far ahead someone has been thinking. Your father, he started. My father is not here, she said, the same way she'd said it in the car. And I love what he built, and I know exactly what it cost. And my son is 7 pounds, 3 ounces, and he's in that room down the hall, and nobody is going to use him as leverage for anything, for as long as I'm alive to prevent it. She went back to writing. Vincent walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Kroll was seen this morning, he said. If he's already watching the estate, then he's seen the security, and he's waiting, she said without looking up. Men like that don't move until they see a gap. We don't give him a gap. And if he's not working alone— She stopped writing, looked at the page in front of her, at the clean lines of the legal framework she'd been building for 3 years, the careful architecture of an empire being transferred and transformed. And she thought about Luciana on the phone this morning, and she thought about the word activated, and she thought about the fact that a woman who had run one of the most powerful criminal families on the eastern seaboard for 40 years was not going to hire one man. She was going to hire enough men. Double the team, Serena said. Tonight. I want people on the perimeter who haven't been here before. Faces Kroll won't have photographed. Bring in the Salvatore crew from Jersey if you have to. Tell them it's short-term premium rate, full discretion. That's 40 additional people. Then it's 40 additional people. She picked up her pen again. And get me Dante Moretti's personal cell number. That stopped Vincent. He turned back. Not through the exchange, she said. Direct. I want to be able to call him myself if I need to. She kept writing. If his mother has hired someone to take our son, Dante needs to know. Not because I trust him, but because a man who just got a DNA result and is driving past my estate twice in one morning is a man who will pick up the phone. And if he doesn't, then I know exactly where I stand with him, she said, and I proceed accordingly. She wrote for another minute. The pen moved in her hand with the focused efficiency of someone who has trained themselves to keep working while their body is still running on adrenaline, because the alternative is to sit with the fear, and sitting with the fear cost time she didn't have. Her son was down the hall, 19 days, 72 hours for the documentation, 48 hours to find Edward Kroll. The numbers ran in her head the way they always ran, clean, sequential, the comfort of quantifiable problems in a situation that kept producing variables that didn't quantify. She could manage the legal timeline. She could manage the security escalation. She could manage Dante, probably, if she needed to. What she couldn't manage was the thing Vincent had said and then not said, if he's not working alone. Because if Luciana Moretti had put multiple assets in the field, not just Kroll, but a team, a coordinated operation with multiple approach vectors targeting the estate, then the security perimeter that had felt solid this morning was a different thing than it had felt this morning, and Serena knew it, and the knowing of it sat behind her sternum like a stone. She finished the page, set it in the outgoing folder, stood and walked to the window and looked out at the courtyard below. The bare winter garden, the stone paths, the low walls of the estate's perimeter just visible past the hedge line. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she let herself stand there without working and just looked at the space and thought about what it would take to hold it. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Dante Moretti. Calling from his direct number, not through any intermediary, the number she'd had for 4 years and had not answered in 3 weeks. She looked at it for 2 full rings. Then she answered. I got the results, he said. His voice was rough in a way she hadn't heard before. Not the managed authority of the man she'd been married to, but something underneath that, something that had been there before the authority and had apparently survived it. "I know," she said. A pause. "I need to tell you something." His voice dropped lower. "About my mother." "I already know about Crawl," she said. The silence on his end lasted 3 seconds. When he came back, something had shifted. She could hear it, the specific sound of a man recalibrating in real time, recalculating the distance between where he thought he was and where he actually was. "How long?" he said. "Since this morning." Another pause. "Longer." "She won't stop," he said. "You understand that?" "She won't. Dante." She kept her voice level, even. The voice she used in contract negotiations, in rooms where men twice her age were waiting to see if she'd flinch. "I need you to listen to me carefully, because I'm only going to say this once, and what you do with it is your decision, and I am done making decisions for you." She heard him breathing on the other end of the line. "Your mother has put a man on my son," she said. "Your son. And if she moves on this estate before I've had the chance to finish what I've built, if anything happens to that child because you stood by while your mother made one more calculation that she didn't tell you about," she stopped. "Let the space work. There will be nothing left to negotiate. Not for you, not for your family name, not for anything the Moretti legacy ever meant. Do you understand me?" The silence stretched. Then, "What do you need from me?" She looked out the window at the winter garden, at the perimeter wall, at the bare branches of the trees that lined the east walk, black against a gray afternoon sky. "Come to the estate," she said. "Tonight. Come alone." A pause. "And bring whatever you have on Crawl's operation. Whatever your mother's people know, whatever she's told you or hasn't told you, bring it. Because if we don't move on him in the next 48 hours, your mother is going to do something that neither one of us can't take back." She ended the call, stood at the window for 3 seconds. Then she turned and went back to the table and picked up her pen and kept working, because there was nothing else to do, and because the alternative was to stand there and feel the full weight of what the next 48 hours required of her, and she couldn't afford the weight right now. She could afford it later. Later, when it was done. Dante arrived at the estate at 9:47 that night. He came alone, as she'd asked. One car, no follow vehicle, no advance man. He stood at the front entrance in a dark coat with his hands visible at his sides, a deliberate gesture, the kind a man makes when he understands that the people on the other side of the door have weapons and reasons. The gate camera caught him in flat white light, and he looked older than he had in the hospital 3 weeks ago. Not tired, carved. The specific erosion of a man who has spent 3 weeks understanding something he can't ununderstand. Serena watched the feed from the conference room, let him stand there for 45 seconds. Then she told the gate to let him in. He came through the front hall without looking at the art or the ceilings or any of the things people usually looked at when they entered a DeLuca property for the first time and understood what the family actually was. He looked straight ahead. He was carrying a folder under his left arm. She met him in the conference room doorway. They looked at each other. 4 years of marriage, 3 weeks of silence, and now this, standing 6 feet apart in a hallway of a house that was hers, with guards at either end, and a baby monitor on the table behind her, and a mercenary somewhere in the city with a brief that had her son's name on it. This was what they'd come to. She let herself see it clearly, and then she set it aside and stepped back into the room. "Sit down," she said. He sat. "Set the folder on the table." She sat across from him, not beside across, and Vincent took the chair at the end without being asked, which was where Vincent always sat when the meeting was the kind that needed a witness. Dante looked at Vincent, then back at Serena. "How much do you have on Crawl?" he said. "Photograph, contact chain to your mother's personal account, his operational history?" She slid the surveillance report across. 2 prior contracts, both asset recovery. In one case, the asset was a ledger. In the other, it was a person. Dante looked at the photograph of Edward Crawl for a long moment. His jaw was set in the way she'd learned meant he was controlling something, not feeling nothing. She used Krawl's network once before, he said. 4 years ago. Before you and I... He stopped. Started again. There was a man who was going to testify against the family in the Castellano matter. Krawl's people got to him before he reached the federal building. He set the photograph down, pushed it back. She didn't tell me then either. Serena said nothing. I found that out 6 months after the fact, Dante said. I confronted her. She told me it was handled and that I didn't need to know the operational details. He looked at the table. I let it go. Because the outcome served the family, and because... He stopped again. The silence was the end of the sentence. Because I let things go when the outcome served us. Because that's what I did. What's in the folder? Serena said. He opened it. 3 pages. The top sheet was a handwritten list. Names, phone numbers, physical descriptions. 4 men, he said. Krawl doesn't work alone. He uses a crew of 4, always the same configuration. 2 on exterior surveillance, 1 as a driver, 1 who goes in. He tapped the second page. This is the operational pattern from the Castellano job. Same structure. They spend 48 to 72 hours on surveillance before they move. They look for patterns, staff rotations, camera blind spots, predictable schedules. How did you get this? Vincent said. I went to my mother's house this afternoon, Dante said. She wasn't there. I went through her office. He paused. She keeps physical records. Old habit. Everything on paper, nothing on a server. He looked at Serena. She has photographs of your estate, taken in the last 4 days. She has your staff rotation schedule, or what she thinks it is. Serena's hands were flat on the table. She kept them flat. She's been running surveillance on my home, she said. Yes. While you were driving past it this morning. I didn't know, he said. His eyes came up to hers. I want to be clear that I didn't know. She looked at him for 3 seconds. The assessment was the same kind she'd made in the hospital. Not emotional, not personal, purely structural. Was he telling the truth? She believed he was, which was not the same as trusting him, and she was careful to keep those 2 things separate in her mind. When does Krawl move, she said. If the pattern hold, tomorrow night, or the night after. He turned to the 3rd page. There's a window in your east perimeter, between the garden wall and the hedge line. The camera angle doesn't cover the full approach. She has it marked. Serena looked at Vincent. Vincent said, We repositioned the east camera 3 days ago. Dante blinked. She's working from outdated surveillance, Serena said, which means Krawl is going to come in through a gap that isn't there anymore. That gives us the approach vector, Vincent said. Yes. She stood, moved to the window, the same window she'd stood at that afternoon, and looked out at the dark courtyard. He'll come through the east walk, past the garden wall. He'll expect a blind spot, and he'll find a camera and 2 additional guards he doesn't know about. She turned back. We let him get inside the perimeter. Vincent straightened. Serena, I need him inside the perimeter, she said. I need him on the grounds, with the contract documentation on him, in a position where we can hold him long enough to get his testimony on record. She looked at Dante. If we intercept him on the street, we get nothing. We get a man with a clean record and a story about taking a walk. If we take him inside the grounds, we have trespass, we have the contract documentation, and we have a witness who will talk if the alternative is a felony charge. Dante was looking at her. The expression on his face was not one she'd seen on him before. Or maybe she had once very early and had forgotten it. Something uncalculated, something close to respect. You're going to use this as evidence against my mother, he said. I'm going to use this to end it, she said. All of it, cleanly, legally, in a way that holds. She paused. Your mother goes to a courtroom, not a grave. That's the difference between what I'm doing and what she would do. He was quiet for a moment. And the party, he said, the announcement, the asset transfers. Those proceed on schedule. Especially with. She came back to the table, sat. The party happens in 17 days. Krawl moves tomorrow or the day after. We take him, we get the documentation, we hand it to Callaway for the federal package, and then in 17 days I walk into the Calabrese estate and I put my name on everything your mother spent 40 years building. She held his gaze. And you're going to let me. Dante sat with that. She could see him working through it. The pride part, the Moretti Dawn part, the part that had been trained since childhood to respond to challenges like this with force and counterforce, and the fundamental unwillingness to cede ground. She watched him work through it and come out the other side. "What do you need from me?" he said, the same words he'd used on the phone. "Stay here tonight," she said. "Not with me. There's a guest room on the second floor. I need you where I can reach you and where you can't accidentally tell your mother anything useful about our positioning." She paused. "And if Crawl's crew makes contact with anyone on your staff tonight, I need to know about it immediately." He nodded. "And Dante," she kept her voice even, "your son is on the third floor, the nursery, east wing. You can see him if you want, for 10 minutes. She watched his face do something complicated and fast. "Not as a negotiation, just, he's yours. You should see him." He stood. He opened his mouth, and whatever he was going to say, he decided against it, which was probably the right call. He just nodded again and followed the guard Vincent had already positioned at the door. She watched him go. Then she sat alone in the conference room for 1 minute, which was all she allowed, and breathed through the specific exhaustion of a woman who has not slept more than 4 hours in any single night for 3 weeks, and is now managing a security operation, a legal restructuring, a federal cooperation framework, and the presence of her estranged husband in the house where she was also trying to keep their infant son alive. 1 minute. Then she picked up her phone and called Calloway and told him to work through the night. Edward Crawl came through the East Walk at 2:14 in the morning. He was alone on point, which matched Dante's description of the operational pattern. 1 man in first, crew holding position outside the perimeter until the interior was confirmed clear. He moved well. She'd give him that. Economy of motion, no wasted steps, the kind of physical intelligence that came from a lot of practice doing things in the dark. He found the garden wall exactly where Luciana's photographs had marked it. He came along the hedge line exactly the way a man would come if he believed the camera angle didn't cover that approach. He was 11 steps inside the perimeter when the lights came on. Not floodlights. Enough light to see by, positioned to illuminate without blinding, because she needed him functional and she needed him talking, and a man whose vision was blown out was neither. He froze. A professional freeze. Not the animal panic of an amateur caught, but the precise stillness of a man doing rapid threat assessment, counting bodies, calculating exits. He counted 8 bodies. There were 12, but 4 were positioned where he couldn't see them, which was by design. "Mr. Crawl," said the guard captain, a man named Heires, 30 years with the DeLuca organization, a voice that had talked people down from worse situations than this. "Put your hands where I can see them, and this goes smoothly." Crawl put his hands up. He was still calculating. She could see it on the monitor in the conference room. The way his eyes moved, methodical, professional, not done yet. "His jacket," she said into the earpiece. Reyes moved forward. Crawl didn't resist the pat-down. He was smart enough to know that resistance now cost more than it bought. Reyes reached the interior pocket and removed a folded envelope and held it up. She exhaled. The envelope went to Calloway's associate, who was standing by in the estate's front room with a secure recorder and a notary. Crawl went to the basement. Not a cell, not rough handling, a room with a chair and a table and 2 guards, and the clear understanding that his options had narrowed significantly, and that the person who was about to walk through the door could make them narrower or wider, depending on how the next hour went. Serena walked through the door. She sat across from him. No folder, no recorder visible, just her hands on the table and the specific quality of attention she brought to rooms where things needed to be settled. He looked at her, looked at the guards, back at her. "The contract was in your jacket," she said. "We have it. We have the contact chain to the account that paid your retainer. We have your operational history on 2 prior jobs." She kept her voice level. "I'm not a prosecutor. I'm not law enforcement. I'm the woman whose son you were contracted to take, and I'm here to offer you one alternative to what happens if I hand everything I have to the federal authorities in the morning." Crawl said nothing, but he was listening. "I need a sworn statement," she said. "The terms of the contract, who gave you the brief, what the target was, what the intended outcome was. I need it on record, notarized, with specifics." She paused. In exchange, I hold the federal package. You walk out of here, not from the country. I'll know if you leave the country, and leaving the country will read as consciousness of guilt, and the package goes to the prosecutor regardless. You stay quiet, and in approximately 3 weeks, when this matter has been resolved in a courtroom, what I have on you becomes leverage I no longer need. Kroll looked at the table for a long time. The woman who hired you, Serena said, is going to prison. I want you to understand that clearly. The question is whether you're in the cell next to her or not. He said, I want that in writing. Calloway, she said to the room, and the door opened. By 4 a.m., she had a notarized statement naming Luciana Moretti as the contracting party, describing the brief, which was, as Vincent had suspected, the acquisition of the infant residing at the DeLuca estate on East 74th, and detailing the method of contact and payment. Kroll's crew had been identified, located, and held at the perimeter. 2 of them had phones with texts from a number that traced back, through one layer, to Elena Cassie. She sat in the conference room with the statement in front of her and Calloway across the table, and Vincent at the window, and the city just starting to lighten outside, that specific pre-dawn gray that was neither night nor morning. That's enough, Calloway said. He was looking at the statement. Combined with the financial documentation, the account traces, that's more than enough. For what charge, she said. Conspiracy. Kidnapping conspiracy, since the target was a minor. Possibly more, depending on what the Castellano connection produces. He set his pen down. Dante's testimony about the prior contract would help. I'll ask him, she said. She found Dante in the hallway outside the nursery. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, which was not a posture she'd ever seen him in before. Don Dante Moretti, feared and precise, sitting on a hallway floor at 4 a.m. with his head tipped back against the wall and his eyes on the ceiling. He'd loosened his tie. His jacket was folded across his knees. She sat down beside him, not close, just beside. We got him, she said. He exhaled. The statement names your mother directly. The federal package goes to Calloway's contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office. She paused. They'll want corroboration, the Castellano matter. He was quiet for a long moment. She's my mother, he said. I know. He stopped. The muscle in his jaw worked. She's been running this family since I was 19 years old. Everything I built with her behind me. Every decision, He stopped again, pressed his mouth into a line. She's still my mother. Serena looked at the nursery door, at the camera mounted above the frame, its small red light steady. That's not a question I can answer for you, she said. I know. But I need to know by morning. He looked at her. In the dim hallway light, she could see the exhaustion on him. Not just tonight's exhaustion, but the accumulated weight of 3 weeks of understanding things he'd spent 43 years not having to understand. He looked like a man who had been taken apart and had not yet figured out which pieces still fit together. She could have killed him, he said. It came out rough, not quite steady. Kroll's people. If they'd gotten in before you repositioned the camera, if the timing was different, yes, she said, simply, without softening it. He closed his eyes for a moment. I'll talk to Calloway, he said. She nodded, stood, started back toward the conference room. Serena. She stopped. He was still sitting on the floor, back against the wall, looking up at her. And there was something in his face she hadn't seen in 4 years of marriage. Or maybe she had that first night at Marco's dinner, before everything calcified into roles and power structures and the particular performance of a mafia marriage, something that had no strategy in it. I'm sorry, he said. For the hospital, for the papers, for standing there and... He stopped. For not choosing you. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said, and she walked back down the hall. The next 16 days moved at 2 speeds simultaneously, glacial in the legal architecture, which required patience and precision, and Calloway working 18-hour days to get every transfer document and cooperation agreement finalized before the party, and explosive in the Moretti household, which was fracturing in ways that Serena tracked through Vincent's network with the detachment of a geologist watching a fault line. Luciana had noticed Kral's silence. She'd called the Elena Cassie number 3 times in the first 24 hours after the estate operation and gotten nothing back. And then she'd gone quiet herself in a way that Vincent described as the quiet of a woman reorganizing. "She's not done," Vincent said. "No," Serena agreed. "She's waiting to see what we do with what we have." "If she knows we have Kral's statement, she'll know we're saving it," Serena said. "Which means she'll know the party is still the target. She'll try to prevent it." "How?" Serena thought about it. Serena thought about Luciana, 61 years old, 40 years of running a family by being 3 moves ahead of every room she walked into, a woman whose instinct for survival was indistinguishable from her instinct for control, a woman who, when cornered, hired mercenaries. "She'll try to warn the other families," Serena said. "She'll reach out to the heads of the attending families and try to poison the room before I get there. Tell them the DeLuca heir is unstable, that the asset transfers are contested, that coming to that party is walking into a trap. And if they listen to her, they won't." She picked up her coffee. "Because she's going to reach out from a position of visible weakness, frozen accounts, broken political contacts, a son who spent the night at his estranged wife's estate and testified against her to a federal attorney. They'll hear the desperation in it." She drank, set the cup down. "But I want our people to reach out first, quietly, to the heads of the 3 most influential families on the guest list. Not to say anything about Luciana, just to confirm attendance, express that the DeLuca family looks forward to their presence, create a social obligation." Vincent smiled, which he did rarely and always briefly. "Your father would have done the same thing." "My father would have done it 2 months ago," she said. She made the calls herself. 3 of them, in the space of one afternoon, the heads of families who had known her father, who had attended his funeral, who had watched the DeLuca empire sit apparently dormant for 3 years and had drawn their own conclusions. She didn't mention Luciana. She didn't mention the Moretti situation. She spoke the way her father had spoken, warmly, specifically, with the particular intimacy of someone who knows a great deal about the person they're calling and has chosen to reference none of it, which is its own kind of power. By the end of the afternoon, 3 confirmations had come back, and 2 of them had added a note. Something like, "Looking forward to seeing you, it's been too long," that told her the ground was prepared. The morning of the party arrived gray and cold, the kind of March day that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to be winter or something else. Serena stood in front of the mirror in her suite at 6 a.m. Her son was in the nursery. Dante was in the guest room on the 2nd floor. The estate was fully staffed, fully secured, the perimeter running 3 rotations instead of 2. Calloway had filed the cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office at 11 p.m. the prior evening, sealed, held for morning execution, contingent on the evening's outcome. She put on the red Valentino. The mirror showed her a woman she recognized and also didn't. Not the quiet, contained Serena Moretti who had poured wine at Dante's dinners and smiled at the right moments and made herself architecturally small for 4 years. And not quite the girl who had grown up in her father's house learning the difference between power and the performance of power. Something between them. Something that had been made by all of it. Vincent knocked. "Car in 20, he said through the door. "I know." She looked at herself for another moment. Then she reached for the earrings. Simple, her mother's, not spectacular, because the point of tonight was not spectacle. The point of tonight was weight. The irreversible, documented, witnessed weight of a name being put back where it belonged. She went downstairs. Dante was in the front hall, dressed, standing with his hands in his pockets in the way of a man who has accepted that he is no longer in charge of what's happening and has not yet found the right posture for that. He looked at her when she came down. The red dress, the set of her shoulders, the fact that she moved through this house like it had always been hers, which it had. "You should know," he said quietly, "that my mother called me this morning." Serena stopped. "When?" 7 a.m. "She told me not to come tonight. She told me if I attended that party beside you, she'd consider it a betrayal of the family." Serena looked at him. "What did you tell her?" she said. He held her gaze. "I told her I'd see her in court," he said. The car arrived at the Calabrese estate at 8:15 p.m. The estate was lit from within. every window blazing, the long driveway lined with black cars and security details, and the particular careful movement of men who were paid to watch everything. Through the windows she could see the shapes of the gathered families, 200 people, the cream and the dangerous of the eastern underworld in one room. Vincent opened her door. She stepped out onto the gravel drive in the red dress and the cold air, and she stood for a moment in the light from the entrance, and she breathed, once deeply all the way down. And she felt the weight of the 3 years of preparation and the 4 years of marriage and the 6 hours in a hospital bed and the storm and the car and her son's fist around her finger, all of it present and accounted for and carried with her into this room. Then she walked in. The effect was not immediate. It built. A ripple moving outward from the entrance, heads turning, conversations pausing, the specific social electricity of a room that has registered something it didn't expect and is still deciding what to make of it. She moved through it without hurrying, Vincent at her left shoulder, 2 of her senior security team behind, Dante a half step back on her right. And that placement, she knew, was its own message. The Moretti Don, arriving not at the head of his own table but beside the woman he'd divorced, carrying the specific posture of a man who has chosen a side. She found Marcus Romano first. He was standing near the bar with 2 associates, a man of 60, who wore his confidence the way men wore expensive suits, as if it had been tailored specifically for him. He saw her, and she watched his face do the work of recognition and calculation in real time. She extended her hand. "Mr. Romano," she said, "thank you for attending. I think you'll find the evening instructive." He shook her hand. He didn't speak. She moved on. At 8:47 p.m., the room had filled to capacity, and the formal program had been announced. The celebration of Dante Moretti and Bianca Romano's engagement, the alliance of 2 families, the usual language of organized power pretending to be social occasion. Vincent moved to the microphone at the front of the room. The conversations died. Bianca Romano was standing near the platform with her father, in white, with the expression of a woman who has understood in the last 60 seconds that something has gone wrong with the evening, but not yet how wrong. Dante had positioned himself at the edge of the room, visible, unmistakable, not beside Bianca, but across the room from her, which every person in that room with any experience read correctly. Vincent spoke. He was not a theatrical man. He didn't need to be. He had a voice that carried without effort and a way of organizing information that left no ambiguity, and what he said in the next 4 minutes, he said the way you lay a foundation, methodically, without ornamentation, with the complete confidence of a man who knows the ground he's standing on. He introduced Serena De Luca, daughter of Carlo De Luca, sole heir to the De Luca family trust, current beneficial owner of the De Luca Syndicate's complete operational portfolio, which he then listed specifically with dates of acquisition and legal instrument references, because specifics were the difference between an announcement and a fact. And then he listed the Moretti assets, casino licenses, port contracts, the Newark development projects, the 3 holding companies whose debt instruments were held by entities controlled by the De Luca Trust, the political relationships that had been cultivated over decades and had, in the last 3 weeks, been transferred, not violently, not illegally, but through the patient and entirely legitimate acquisition of the financial infrastructure that made them possible. The room was silent in a way rooms are rarely silent, not the silence of people being polite, the silence of people recalibrating. He finished, stepped back. Serena stepped forward. She looked at the room, at 200 faces representing the full weight of the Eastern underworld's power structure, and she said, clearly and without performance, "The De Luca Syndicate is open for business. All prior Moretti obligations to this room will be honored under De Luca terms, which you'll receive in writing by Monday morning. I look forward to those conversations." She stepped back. The room held its silence for 2 more seconds. Then Marcus Romano, across the room, set down his drink and began to clap. Not enthusiasm, acknowledgement. The specific, measured applause of a man respecting what he's just witnessed. And when Romano started, 3 others followed. And then the room found its own complicated rhythm of response. Some applauding, some silent, some already moving to their phones. Bianca Romano walked out. Her father watched her go and then looked at Serena across the room with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not anger, she thought, not quite. Something closer to recognition. Dante stood at the edge of the room. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the place in the room where his name had been publicly removed from everything his family had built, and she watched his face hold it without breaking, which was either strength or the last performance of a man who'd spent a lifetime performing, and she genuinely didn't know which. And then he turned and found her eyes across the room. She held his gaze. Outside, somewhere in the estate's perimeter, a security radio crackled. Then another. Then Vincent was at her elbow, and his voice was low and fast, and nothing in his expression was casual anymore. "Eastgate," he said. "We have a breach. Multiple vehicles. Armed." She turned to him. "How many?" she said. "At least 12, Vincent said. "Maybe more coming around the south side." Serena didn't move for one full second. 1 second of absolute stillness in the middle of a ballroom full of 200 people who had not yet understood what the radio crackle meant. And in that second, she did what her father had taught her to do in rooms that were about to become dangerous. She found the exits, she counted her people, and she made the first decision. "Get everyone away from the windows," she said. "Quietly. No panic. Tell the Calabrese security chief it's a perimeter situation and we have it contained." She looked at Vincent. "Do we have it contained?" "Our outer team is engaging," he said. "Reyes is on point. But 12 vehicles, Serena, that's not crawl. That's a different operation." "I know." She was already moving toward the side corridor, away from the ballroom floor. "Luciana didn't send crawl tonight. She sent crawl for my son. Tonight she sent everyone else." The sound came through the estate walls before most people in the ballroom registered it. Not loud, not cinematic, just the flat percussion of controlled engagement outside, the kind of sound that people who have spent their lives adjacent to violence recognize before they can name it. 200 heads turned toward the windows simultaneously. Then the lights went out. Not all of them. The generator kicked in within 4 seconds, emergency lighting strobing amber through the ballroom. But 4 seconds of darkness in a room full of armed men was its own kind of detonation. She heard chairs, she heard movement, she heard at least 2 women make sounds that were quickly silenced, and by the time the amber light settled over the room, she was already in the corridor with Vincent and 2 of her team, and Dante was behind her, moving fast, his jacket off, the specific compact urgency of a man who grew up in rooms like this and knows what the sounds mean. "My son," she said. "Estate is locked down," Vincent said. "I had the night team seal the nursery floor the moment we left." "Call them," he called. It rang twice, and the guard picked up and said the floor was secure and the baby was asleep and nobody had approached the building perimeter. She exhaled through her nose and kept moving. The corridor ran along the east wing of the Calabrese estate, toward a service exit that opened onto the grounds. Through the wall, she could hear the engagement outside. Sporadic, controlled, her people working in patterns she'd drilled them on. Not a firefight, not yet. A perimeter defense. The question was how long the perimeter held and what Luciana's people were actually after. "She's not here for me," Serena said, half to herself, working it while she moved. "She's here to destroy the evening, shut down the announcement before it can be processed. Create enough chaos that the families in that room associate the DeLuca name with vulnerability." "Or she's here to take you," Dante said from behind her. She glanced back at him. "Crawl was for the boy," he said. "Tonight is for you. If you're gone, the asset transfers are contested. She'll have her attorneys tie up probate on the DeLuca Trust for 5 years, minimum. Everything you announced in that room tonight becomes a legal question instead of a fact." Serena stopped walking. She thought about it for 3 seconds. 3 seconds of running the logic, and it landed the way things land when they're true. Clean, with weight. "She's not trying to stop the evening," she said. "She's trying to make me disappear before I can execute the cooperation agreement." Vincent said, "The filing with the U.S. attorney is sealed until morning," she said. "If I'm gone tonight, there's no one to authorize execution. The agreement lapses." She looked at him. "She knows about the filing." "How?" Because she's been running this family for 40 years and she has people in places we don't know about yet. She turned to Dante. Who did you tell about the cooperation agreement? His jaw tightened. Nobody. Think. Nobody, Serena. Calloway, you, Vincent. That's the full circle. I didn't. He stopped. Something moved across his face. My phone. Vincent looked at him sharply. I used my personal phone when I called Calloway from the guest room, Dante said. The words came out flat, the specific flatness of a man hearing himself identify his own mistake. She has access to my carrier account. She's had access since I was 19, and I never changed it because I never thought. He pressed his mouth closed. She's been reading my calls. The silence in the corridor lasted exactly as long as it needed to. All right, Serena said, not angry. There wasn't time for anger, and anger wouldn't change the geometry. All right, she knows about the filing, and she has 12 vehicles outside, and the agreement executes at 9 a.m. or not at all. She looked at Vincent. What do I need to physically do to authorize early execution? Call Calloway. Verbal authorization triggers the electronic signature protocol. He files immediately, tonight, regardless of hour. Then I need my phone in 30 seconds. It's in your coat, Vincent said, which is in the ballroom. She turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Dante caught her arm. Not hard. A hand on her forearm, the specific grip of someone who needs 1 second and knows they only have 1 second to ask for it. Let me go get it, he said. She looked at him. I know that room, he said. I know how to move through a room like that without creating a secondary situation. Let me get your coat. She looked at him for 2 seconds, assessed, made the call. Left side of the entrance, she said. Black wool, inside breast pocket. He went. She stood in the corridor with Vincent and the 2 guards and listened to the estate around her. The ongoing percussion outside, lower now, more intermittent, which meant one of 2 things. Either the engagement was resolving or it was consolidating for something larger. She needed to know which. Heires, she said into her earpiece. Static. Then, here. Status? We've pushed them back to the south fence. 7 vehicles, not 12. The others were decoys running the north perimeter to split our attention. A pause, and she could hear him breathing hard, moving. 2 of theirs down, 1 of ours. A beat. Santos, he's stable, it's a shoulder. She registered that. Santos, 32 years old, wife in Queens, 2 daughters, shoulder. Hold the south fence, she said. Don't pursue past the perimeter. I want everyone inside the boundary. Copy. Dante came back. He was moving fast, coat over his arm, and there was a small cut above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there 2 minutes ago. She took the coat. Didn't ask about the cut. Found her phone. Called Calloway. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he'd been awake waiting. Execute it, she said. Right now. File the cooperation agreement tonight. A pause of 3 seconds. She could hear him pulling up the interface. Verbal authorization received at, he checked, 9:22 p.m. Filing now. Another pause. Keys in the background. It's filed. Time-stamped. The U.S. Attorney's intake will have it by 9:23. Thank you, Marcus. Stay in one piece, he said, and ended the call. She put the phone in the coat pocket and looked at Vincent. It's done, she said. He exhaled, a small exhale, controlled, but she saw it. 3 years of building toward this, and the filing was the keystone, the piece that made everything else irreversible. Whatever happened in the next hour in this estate, Luciana Moretti was named in a federal cooperation agreement that was now time-stamped and in the intake system of the United States Attorney's Office. The operation outside was winding down. She could feel it in the building the way you feel weather change. A shift in pressure, the specific deceleration of a coordinated action losing momentum. Reyes confirmed it 12 minutes later. 7 vehicles had pulled back from the south fence, leaving behind 2 men who had been secured and were talking to each other with the specific animated despair of people who understood they'd been on the losing side of something. She went back to the ballroom. The room had reorganized itself in her absence. The Calabrese family's own security had established a calm, the guests had been moved away from the windows, and the specific social electricity of 200 powerful people who have just experienced something unexpected had settled into the lower frequency of careful conversation. People were talking in small groups, some were on phones, some were watching the door she came through. She walked back in wearing the red dress and the black coat and her mother's earrings, and the composed expression of a woman who has just authorized a federal filing and is now returning to a room full of peers to let them draw their own conclusions about what just happened and what it means. Marcus Romano was waiting near the center of the room. He was alone, which was deliberate. He looked at her and she looked at him and he said, "Is it handled?" "Yes," she said. He nodded once. Then he said, "Your father would have liked the way you did this." She held his gaze. "I'll take that." He moved away. The evening broke up by 11. Cars pulled out of the long driveway in intervals, the organized dispersal of people who had absorbed significant information and were now going home to process it and make decisions. She stood at the entrance and watched them go and shook hands with the ones who offered hands and met eyes with the ones who only offered eyes, and there was something in the aggregate of those interactions, the nods, the specific quality of attention people were giving her, that told her the room had understood, not just the announcement, the whole of it, the red dress in a room that had been expecting her to not exist, the operation outside that had failed, the fact that she was standing at the door at 11 p.m. in the same dress, unhurried, while the woman who'd tried to stop her was somewhere across the city with 12 vehicles and nothing to show for it. Bianca Romano had left early and would not be back. She'd looked at Serena once, near the door, before going, not with hatred, which Serena would have understood, but with something more complicated. The look of a woman who has realized she was not a principal in the situation she'd been told she was central to, and who is deciding right now what to do with that. Serena would hear, 6 weeks later through mutual channels, that Bianca had quietly declined all further engagement with Moretti family matters and had left the country for an extended stay in Milan. She would not resurface in the underworld. At 11:47 p.m., Luciana Moretti was arrested at her townhouse on the Upper East Side. Serena wasn't there for it. She was in the car heading back to the estate, her son alive and asleep on the third floor, the filing time-stamped in a federal intake system. The evening concluded. She heard about it from Vincent, who heard it from Calloway, who heard it from the assistant U.S. attorney who had been waiting for the filing to clear before moving. The charges were read to Luciana Moretti in her own hallway, in front of 2 of her personal staff who would later give statements, while she stood in a robe and pearl earrings with the composure of a woman who had rehearsed this possibility and had decided long ago how she would meet it. She said nothing except to ask for her attorney. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She looked at the agent in charge with the specific focused attention of a woman who was already calculating her next position, and she was still calculating when the cuffs went on. Dante got the call while he was still in the car behind Serena's. He sat with it for a long time. She knew because she could see his headlights in the mirror. His car had pulled to the side of the road and stopped, sitting there in the middle of the night while hers kept moving, and she watched those headlights in the mirror until the curve of the road took them from view. She got back to the estate at midnight. She went upstairs before anything else, before the debrief, before the calls from Calloway and Heires, before any of the administrative weight of what the evening had produced. She went upstairs and into the nursery and stood over her son's crib in the dark and looked at him. He was on his back, one arm out. His face in sleep had the specific smoothness of a person who has not yet accumulated the things that mark a face, and she stood over him and looked at that smoothness and felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, possibly the first time in longer than that, something that wasn't calculation or strategy or the adrenaline of sustained survival, something that had no task in it. She picked him up, gently, so gently he didn't wake, just shifted, made the small sound he made when moved, settled again against her chest, with his fist finding her collarbone. She sat in the chair by the window and held him in the dark and looked out at the city below, all those lights running in every direction as far as she could see. She sat there for a long time. Santos was out of surgery by 2 a.m, shoulder wound, clean, no arterial involvement. His wife was at the hospital. Serena called the hospital directly and spoke to the attending and arranged for the bill to be settled through a DeLuca Foundation account that had existed for exactly this purpose for 22 years. She made a note to visit him when he was ready for visitors. The two men taken at the South Fence gave statements over the following 3 days. Their statements named Luciana Moretti as the operational authority for the evening's assault and connected 3 of the participating vehicles to a security contractor that had worked exclusively for the Moretti family for 8 years. That contractor's records, subpoenaed on day 4, produced documentation of 11 prior operations, 3 of which the U.S. Attorney's Office found immediately interesting. By the end of the first week, Luciana Moretti's attorney had requested a bail hearing. It was denied. By the end of the second week, 2 members of the assault crew had entered plea agreements. Their testimony corroborated Kral's statement on the nursery operation and added the evening's assault to the conspiracy count. The charge sheet expanded. By the end of the month, the Moretti family's remaining legal counsel had advised all remaining family members to cooperate fully with the investigation because the alternative had become structurally untenable. The DeLuca Syndicate's formal transition absorbed the Moretti operational portfolio over the following 6 weeks, not violently, not suddenly, but in the deliberate and methodical way of a larger organization integrating a smaller one through paperwork and personnel conversations, and the patient renegotiation of contracts. Some of the Moretti family's longtime associates transitioned without difficulty. A few didn't, and those were handled with the specific combination of financial pressure and legal clarity that Serena had been building toward for 3 years. There were no bodies. She'd meant what she'd said to Dante in the conference room that first night. Bodies were loud. Bodies created martyrs. And she'd meant it not only as strategy, but as something more fundamental, the decision about what kind of operation the DeLuca Syndicate was going to be under her leadership. Her father had built it one way. She was going to build it another. Not softer. She had no illusions about what it took to hold ground in the world she operated in, but different, cleaner, with its weight placed differently. The cooperation agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office produced, over the following 4 months, a restructuring framework that would take years to fully execute, and that Calloway had told her would be studied by legal academics for longer than that. It was, by any measure, unprecedented. The voluntary structural transformation of a major organized crime enterprise into a legitimate holding company in exchange for a cooperation credit that protected the DeLuca family name from the most significant legacy criminal exposure. Her father's lawyers had told him twice that it couldn't be done. She'd started building it anyway. Dante came to the estate 3 weeks after the arrest. Not to ask for anything. He'd stopped asking for things, which she'd noticed and which had registered differently than she expected, the way a silence can register differently than the sound that preceded it. He came to see his son, who was by then 6 weeks old and had begun doing the specific thing that 6-week-old babies do when they recognize a face, a slow, full-body focusing, the eyes finding what they want and staying. He found what he wanted. She left them alone in the nursery for 20 minutes. When she came back, Dante was sitting in the chair by the window with the baby on his chest. The baby who had fallen asleep in the specific boneless way of an infant who has decided the surface he's on is safe. And he was looking out the window at the city, and he looked different than he'd looked at any point in 4 years of marriage. He looked like someone who had put something down. She sat on the edge of the dresser across the room and watched them for a moment without speaking. "My mother's trial date has been set," he said. He kept his voice low because of the baby. "I know. She's going to plead not guilty." He paused. "Her attorney says it's the only viable strategy. Make the prosecution work for every inch." "That's her right," Serena said. He glanced at her. You're not angry about that." "I have the filing. I have 4 sworn statements. I have the phone records. I have the contractor documentation. And I have 2 plea agreements from men who were on my property with weapons." She looked at him steadily. "She can plead whatever she chooses. It won't change the outcome." He went back to looking at the window. "I'm going to testify," he said. She said nothing. "Against her." He said it quietly, the same way he'd said "I'm sorry" in the hallway. Not performing the difficulty of it, just naming it. "It's the right thing. I know what she did. I know about Castellano. I know about Kral. I know about that night at the estate." He shifted slightly, careful not to wake the baby. She spent 40 years making decisions she didn't tell me about and calling it protection. I spent 40 years accepting that. He paused. I'm done accepting it. Serena looked at her son's face against Dante's chest. The smooth, sleeping face, the fist curled near his chin. I know, she said. They sat in the quiet of the nursery for a while. Outside, the city did what the city did. Relentless, indifferent, endlessly moving. And the room held its own particular stillness, the specific piece of a space where someone very small and very new is sleeping and the people around them are, for the moment, not fighting. I'm not asking to come back, Dante said. He said it to the window, not to her. I want to be clear about that. I know what I did in that hospital room, and I know what that costs. A pause. But I want to be his father, whatever that looks like from outside this marriage. Whatever arrangement you're willing to allow, I want to show up for him. She took her time answering, not because she didn't know what she was going to say, but because the answer deserved the time. Then show up, she said, not with words, with the Tuesday visits and the 2 a.m. calls when he's sick and the school forms and the years of it, all the ordinary, undramatic parts that nobody sees. She looked at him. That's what showing up means. And if you do that consistently, for as long as it takes, he'll know. Dante nodded. His jaw was tight in the way she'd learned meant he was holding something, not suppressing it. There was a difference she'd come to understand. Suppression was armor. This was something else. This was a man carrying the weight of his choices and choosing not to put it down simply because it was heavy. That, she thought, might be the first sign that he was going to be different. She didn't say it out loud. Some things needed to be lived before they could be named. She stood, went to the door. 15 more minutes, she said. Then I need to take him. He nodded without looking away from the window. She left them there. She went up to the roof of the estate. A space she'd reclaimed in the first week of reopening the building had the tar and debris cleared and a simple railing installed. Nothing elaborate, just enough to stand at the edge safely. She went there sometimes in the evenings when the day had been long and she needed something that wasn't a room with walls and a desk and the ongoing accumulated demand of running an empire in transformation. Tonight was clear, cold still, March refusing to release its grip, but clear, the city spread below in every direction, all those windows lit and all that motion and the specific compressed energy of a place that never entirely stopped. She could see the park. She could see, if she oriented correctly, the building where the Moretti townhouse was. Dark, probably, its owner in federal custody, and its rooms in the process of being inventoried by attorneys. She looked at the city for a long time. She thought about her father, thought about the way he'd stood at windows like this one. Different windows, same city, the same posture of a person looking at something they're responsible for and taking the measure of it honestly. He'd been a hard man in many ways. Not cruel, but made of the material that hardness requires. The particular density that comes from choosing authority early and carrying it long. He'd loved her in the specific way of a man who doesn't know how to make love small, abundantly, and not always gently, and with the complete assumption that she would be strong enough for it, which she always had been. She missed him in the specific way that doesn't go away. Not the sharp grief of the early years, but the settled kind. The awareness of an absence that has simply become part of the architecture of life, the gap where a person used to be that you stop trying to fill and start learning to navigate. She thought about what he would have said about tonight, about the red dress and the announcement and the operation at the south fence and the federal filing and Luciana in handcuffs and her son sleeping on his father's chest in the nursery 3 floors below. She thought he would have said, "You built it clean," which was the highest thing he knew how to say. She stood at the railing until the cold got into her coat, and then she went back inside, back downstairs, through the hallway that smelled like her childhood, and something new underneath it that was hers specifically. And she opened the nursery door and found Dante standing with the sleeping baby and looking at her with the expression of a man who has used his 15 minutes and knows it. She took her son from him. The transfer was careful and practiced. She'd gotten good at it in 6 weeks, the specific architecture of handing a sleeping infant without waking him. And her son resettled against her chest with the absolute trust of someone who has not yet learned that trust requires evidence. She thought, I'll teach him that. And the rest. Dante gathered his coat from the chair back. He moved toward the door. "Same time next week," she said. He stopped. "Tuesday," she said. 6 o'clock. "Consistent, Dante." "That's what I said." Something moved across his face. Not gratitude exactly, nothing that simple. More like the recognition of something being offered that he understood the precise value of and knew he hadn't earned yet. "Tuesday," he said. 6 o'clock. He left. She stood in the nursery with her son and listened to his footsteps go down the hall, down the stairs, through the front door and out into the night. She heard the car. She heard it pull away. She listened until the sound of it was gone. Then she looked down at her son. He was awake. Not crying, not fussing, just awake. The way he sometimes woke in the evening, quietly, with his eyes open in the specific, unfocused focus of a very new person trying to make sense of the visual field. He found her face. He always found her face, with that slow, full-body certainty, the way he found it in the dark of the car that first night, and had been finding it ever since. She sat down in the chair by the window. The city ran its lights below. Her son looked at her face, and she looked at his, and the room was quiet in the particular way that rooms are quiet when nothing more is required of them. She had spent 4 years being made small in someone else's house. She had spent 3 years building the instrument of her return. She had spent 3 weeks executing it, through a storm and a hospital bed and a mercenary in her garden and a ballroom full of dangerous men and a federal filing at 9:23 p.m. and a gunshot wound that wasn't hers and handcuffs that were placed on exactly the wrist that had earned them. She had not done it for power. She had done it for this specific room, this specific weight in her arms, this face looking up at her with the complete unselfconscious trust of a person who has decided the world is safe enough to look at openly. Everything else? The empire, the asset transfers, the cooperation agreement, the name on the wall, that was architecture. Necessary. Built to last. But architecture was what you built so that something inside it could exist without constant defense. This was what was inside it. She was 30 years old. She had a son who was 6 weeks old, and a city spread below her window, and an empire in the careful, irreversible process of becoming something different than it had been. She had work tomorrow, and calls in the morning, and Callaway at 9, and the long patience of an operation that would take years to fully complete. She had Tuesday. She looked at her son until his eyes closed again, the way they always closed, slowly, with the trust of someone who has never once considered that there might be a reason not to close them. And she stayed in the chair by the window for a long time after that, not working, not planning, not calculating anything at all, just holding him, just that. The queen of the underworld, the heir to the DeLuca syndicate, the woman who had walked into a room full of dangerous men in a red dress and put her name on the wall. She sat in a dark nursery in a house that had always been hers, holding her son, and outside the window the city moved on in every direction, vast and indifferent and entirely unaware that somewhere inside it, very quietly, something that had been broken had been made whole, not restored. Not returned to what it was before. Something different. Something that had been forged in the specific heat of a hospital room in a storm, and 3 weeks of methodical, patient-controlled retribution, and one night at the end of it where everything came apart and then didn't. Something that was going to last.